All right, y'all, welcome to Keepin the Comic, and we're going to be jumping into the second issue of Black Panther's Blood Hunt comic tie-in. Now, what I actually really liked about this one is that it didn't really feel like a Blood Hunt story. It was more of a story that explains a little bit about the Wakanda mythology, sort of like their origin, like how Bast claimed the Wakandans in the first place a little bit, and then the beginning of vampires, which that is the tie-in to Bloodhead. Now, really quick, just to get you caught up, if you haven't read the first issue here, just some quick backstory. So T'Challa is no longer the king of Wakanda and has been exiled, which is a whole nother story within itself. However, T'Challa is still the Black Panther because he's empowered by the hardship herb, so he's still the protector of Wakanda. Now, Blade had turned T'Challa into a vampire and sent him back to Wakanda for a mission, which we're going to talk about later. And T'Challa had to sneak into Wakanda because, number one, my man is exiled, and also, to make matters worse, he is now a vampire, which Bast is very pissed off about, but ultimately, it's really her fault, or really their fault, which we'll talk about later as well. Now, in this series, where we pick up on is we go to a flashback, which is from like millions of years ago, right, to this ugly looking ass demon named Varney that's chasing a Wakanda woman in a temple who he eventually kills. Now, she has these metal looking cuffs around her wrists, which are made of vibranium. It's important to understand that at this time, the Wakandans had not yet received the gift of vibranium yet. In fact, Varney had stole this vibranium and he was intending to use it. Number one, he was using it to shackle the people of Wakanda, and he was also intending to use it as a gateway to becoming a god himself, which sounds crazy that the demon would become a god. Now, this pisses off Khonshu, and he wants to seek revenge for what Varney did. Number one, because the woman that Varney killed was a follower of Khonshu, and then number two, because this dude is trying to become a god. That's despicable. Dude is a demon after all. So are you freaking kidding me, right? So Bast is advising him not to go seek out war. She's trying to explain to him, you cannot retaliate on your own because of the East African pantheon of gods and the West African pantheons of gods. If you act on your own, this could cause war between the gods, which is going to further just increase the time that Varney has to cause damage, right? So the East and the West pantheon of gods, by the way, they're like 6 gods in total. We have Khonshu, which you know about already. There's Bast that's there. There's this gorilla god who I'm going to keep it 100 with you. I cannot pronounce that name. I'm not even going to try. There's Pitta. There's also Ishu. And then there's also Anuket, which we're going to see a little bit later on. So the Council of Gods, so they get together, right? And they create a plan to try to defeat Varney, which was successful, but their biggest mistake was that they actually did not destroy Varney. Bast actually mentions that his body was never recovered, nor was his temple, and that this carelessness left the possibility for Varney to come back and return. Now, as I mentioned earlier, right, Blade had turned T'Challa into a vampire and had sent T'Challa back to Wakanda to search for that hidden temple, which is a major part of Blade's overall plan. Now, that temple that T'Challa is supposed to be finding is the temple of Varney, the ones that the gods cannot find themselves. So, one of the gods, you know, or I should say goddess, actually, I'm going to say goddess, but her name is Anuket. I mentioned her earlier. Now, she was summoned from under the water by Bast. Now, Anuket is the goddess of lust who travels through the Nile waters. Now, she had mentioned about Varney's temple that it was cast into the dark waters far past her dominion, right? Bast understands that. She's like, okay, I get that you can't go there, but she wants Anuket to take T'Challa down into the seas to find the hidden temple to destroy it because she doesn't want Varney's children to learn of the true power, aka Blade and the Blood Coven, because that's gonna be damn dangerous. Now, I'm kind of burying the lead here a little bit, but you probably picked up on it by now, right? Varney is the first vampire. When the gods had reached Varney's temple back millions of years ago, they found that Varney had turned a bunch of Wakandans into vampires. So Bast had also mentioned the words like the last of the first, and that T'Challa was poisoned by the venom of Varney, indicating that the vampire venom is from Varney. So all vampires pretty much basically were birthed, you know, from Varney. And due to them not destroying him and the temple, that left the opportunity for him to basically kind of like function in darkness. And now he has the opportunity to be free because of the dark force energy that Blade has released over the entirety of the world. That could mean that it could get infinitely worse if Blade is able to find that hidden temple. It's funny though, like Blade wants him to find the temple so that, of course, he could discover the power of the temple, and then Bast is just like, I want you to destroy the temple. So either way, this dude's on a mission to go find that damn temple. Now, Bast was able to save, in terms of the Wakandans, she was able to save a bunch of Wakandans that day that were led out, by Panthers to safety. And that day of defeat, although it wasn't destruction for Varney, was the day that the Wakandans actually received the official gifting, or the acceptance, I should say, of Bast. She then gave them the gift of vibranium. They got their freedom. The shackles were loose, from Varney, but then also, of course, the outside world. So if we're going back now into the present day, into the story, Anukit takes Black Panther underwater. Now, as I mentioned, Anukit is the goddess of lust and is quite fond of T'Challa. Now, being that T'Challa is a vampire, there is that hunger for blood that he has. Now, Anukit, she sees it as an opportunity, the goddess of lust, right? It gives him a full taste of that blood from that river goddess. I mean, shoot, I wouldn't even be able to resist that myself, my dude. I don't blame you. And it was at that moment that T'Challa understands that the blood, like whatever the Blood Coven's desire to feed from a goddess, the same thing that kind of Varney wanted to feed from, like that's their desire, right? To become gods, to feed, from that energy. He understands it now based on tasting that blood, from Anukit. Now, he mentions something like how he feels like one with immortality, but eventually Anukit breaks free from him, and T'Challa, feeling all strong and mighty and everything, goes a little bit further into the waters. And then before he could get too far, my man gets stopped, because guess what? This is the waters after all in Africa. So the Atlanteans stopped them, and that is where stops him, I should say. And that is where the story ends. So curious to see where we pick up on as we move a little bit forward and further here. How do you like this story so far? Leave it in the comments. Appreciate y'all watching. And until next time, thank you for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic.